Top Indian youngster Gukesh takes on Nguyen Thai Dai in the second round of the Prague Masters. The game opens with c4. Thai Dai is a young talent from Czech Republic and he's the last seed of the tournament but pretty strong. He has a rating of 2630. He's 22 years old. Gukesh responds with e6 and Thai Dai plays g3. He wants to put his bishop on this long diagonal and then to decide whether he'll go into d4 territory, the Catalan, later if needed. d5, Gukesh plays very super solid in the center. The bishop comes to g2 and it's very well placed. The knight can come out next on f3. Gukesh goes very aggressive, with this move d4. Generally, you can put your knight on f6, bishop e7, castle. But with d4, you are showing your intention. You're saying to your opponent that I am ambitious, I'm going for space, and that's why you play d4. Now knight comes out to f3 and black pushes his pawn to c5. With this, black has more space in the center. Later on, knight c6, e5 can be played. Thai Dai castles here. Later on, he has two breaks, e3 and b4. Which one will he go for? Oh, knight e7. This is very interesting chess. Gukesh plays his knight to e7 and then maybe put this knight on c6 because this knight will control e5. The other knight will go to d7 and also control e5. Wow, this is some really deep chess and this has been played before but not as much. So very interesting opening idea by Gukesh. And if you look at Thai Dai position, he's developed his pieces, he's castled and does the right thing by breaking in the center. Gukesh now finishes his development. He plays bishop e7. He wants to castle. Of course, just the king side development. His queen side pieces are still blocked in. Rook e1 played, which is a normal natural move. I would say a much more energetic approach by take could have been taken with knight a3, knight c2. But who can say that rook e1 move is wrong? Like this is just a normal way to play. Knight a3 played by Thai Dai. He wants to go knight c2, put pressure in the center and then b4. Gukesh takes the pawn. Very interesting decision. Because if you take with the pawn, I'm going e5. But even if you take with the bishop, e5, then making the d3 pawn a backward pawn makes sense. So bishop e3 played and well, e5 is a must because if white gets d4, he would be doing very well. So e5 played here by Gukesh. He has made the d3 pawn weak. The d4 square is weak, but on the other hand, look at white's development. All pieces developed. Queen b3. I'm not really sure about this move. Like, what's the point of it? Where are you attacking here? Gukesh plays this fine move, knight a6. Fantastic. The knight can go from c7 to e6 to d4. Or can also go to b4. Rook d1 played, but d4 is not coming up. So now Gukesh can actually just defend this pawn on b7 somehow. Yes, knight b4. The knight is well placed there on the b4 square, attacking a2, attacking d3, and Thai Dai wants to immediately get rid of it. So he plays knight c2, which makes a lot of sense. Knight c2, next move, he can pick this up. So Gukesh takes the knight, queen takes, and maybe go into the center here some point, if you want to get there. First goes bishop g4. Now actually pinning the knight and preparing knight d4 at a later point. That's the idea. Thai Dai plays h3 and he asks a question to Gukesh, where do you want to go? For Gukesh, taking here may not be such a great idea because then white has a very strong bishop. So he goes back to e6 and that's a very interesting decision by Gukesh because he's provoked the move h3. Queen c3 played, putting pressure here, but anyway f6 is Gukesh's plan. It's part of Gukesh's idea here to play f6. He does that. He now has a very strong center. Black's position is definitely preferable here. He goes queen a3. There was an interesting idea here to go b4. With cb4, then one can just move back and then try for d4 later at a later point. But instead, he goes queen a3. Knight jumps to b4, threatening a deadly fork here. He goes queen b3 back, and now Gukesh has to figure out what next to do. He plays his queen to c8. Interesting chess. He's attacking the pawn on h3 and also defending the b7 pawn. He could have also played queen d7, but then there is this classy move d4 which was prepared. So take, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, threatening here. There are many such problems here in this position. So that's the reason why Gukesh went queen c8, and now king h2 played and Gukesh goes rook b8. The pawn comes to a3, kicking the knight off, and Gukesh can go back now. Knight to c6. He plays his knight back to c6. Slowly and steadily he is gaining a huge advantage. b6 next. Knight d2 played. Maybe Thai Dai wants knight e4, knight c3, knight d5 to put his knight in the center of the board. And Gukesh now plays king h8. He brings his king to the side of the board. And also there's f4 break actually. This is also looking pretty good. He waits. He plays queen c2. But f4 can come in at some point. I like how the Czech player has been fighting and also keeping up the pressure. There is this idea now of knight b3, b6 and then pushing d4. Not so silly, because take, you have bishop takes. If you take with the pawn, there is take here and knight takes. So all these tactics are there in the air. Thai Dai must be alert, and instead he goes knight e4. Gukesh plays b6 and the knight is coming to c3, it seems. Yes, he plays his knight to c3. This maneuver is quite well known. The knight wants to come to the center. Now Gukesh puts his knight first in the center. Thai Dai takes it, pawn takes, and look at this pawn chain. Whoo, what a pawn chain there with the bishop pair. And now knight comes to d5. So you can say that Gukesh is better here with bishop d6, and often this knight on d5 looks great but does very little, and that is exactly the case here. So b4 played by white, and here a very standard move is b5, hitting the position, but he goes f5. So Gukesh getting quite aggressive here. He may want to play even f4 at some point. Queen comes to e2. What is his idea here? Not so sure. He plays his rook to e8. Gukesh keeping a very strong hold in the center. Thai Dai trying to at some point get his pawn to c5. If he gets c5, c6, he would be doing really well. But Gukesh goes back, and now c5 impossible to get because your knight is hanging. So all in all, a great position here for Gukesh. And now king g1 played, trying to get against this diagonal, but b5 is such a powerful undermining move. No, he goes bishop f7. Gukesh not being very alert there for the b5 break. And Thai Dai now plays queen to d2. He improves his queen position, and Gukesh goes back bishop e6. Maybe he's seen that if queen e2, he now has the b5 move, so he's offering a repetition. But Thai Dai doesn't take it. He goes queen d1, and now b5 is still on the cards. It's an excellent move. Gukesh goes queen f7. He's just maneuvering his pieces for the time being. The rook goes to c2. Maybe then you want to play rook e2 and put pressure on the e2 pawn. White also needs some plan, and finally Gukesh breaks with b5, which is the best idea in the position. Rook goes to e2, and now you can take, but somehow you can't push e4 just as yet. So he goes rook c8, and now Thai Dai, who is just under a minute on the clock, needs to figure what to do. He sacks his exchange. Wow, what a decision there, and such clarity from white. You know, he just said, okay, I think this is a worthwhile exchange. Sack, bishop takes, rook takes on e5, and now can Gukesh try and win a pawn here. He takes on c4. Let's say if you take back, then Gukesh would snatch this pawn. But first, Thai Dai 1 goes knight f4. He's attacking the bishop on e6. The bishop has to move away, but where exactly? Maybe bishop d7 is the only move. Gukesh plays that pretty quickly. And now d takes c4 will be played. But now Gukesh can take with the queen here or even with the rook. He can afford to take with the rook here, which he does, because after bishop d5, which is actually looking deadly, there's queen f6 hitting the rook. So that's what Gukesh has calculated there. Bishop f1 played, and now you just go back here. He goes queen f6. He doesn't even save his rook. He just goes queen f6. And Thai Dai 1 can now play rook a5 and attack the a7 pawn. He goes rook d5, attacking the pawn here, also the bishop. Rook comes back to c7. 40 moves are done. Thai Dai 1 goes to the washroom, maybe to get fresh. He was under time pressure for quite a long time. Gukesh, meanwhile, has quite some time on the clock. He paced his time quite well, and now they are back thinking once again. Here he plays b5, and maybe one of his ideas of b5 was to stop the bishop from coming on this long diagonal, because that bishop would be well placed then. Rook c8 played by Gukesh. He wants to get in with rook c1 here. That's his idea. Queen takes d4. That's not a good idea. I mean, he could have played a4. He could have kept things under control, but queen d4 means that now pieces are going to get traded. Queen takes, rook takes, and now a classy move here would be bishop e8, preparing rook d7 to trade one pair of rooks. If the rooks are off, then the white pawns become very, very weak, and Gukesh finds it. Great move, bishop e8, threatening rook d7. Maybe later on g5 is also possible. That is just completely winning now for Gukesh. But some technique needs to be shown. Bishop d3, not the best. He could have gone h4 so that after rook d7, rook b4 could be played. But with bishop played to d3, now rook d7, it's not so easy to avoid the trade of rooks. Maybe he must avoid it, because if he doesn't avoid it, he is in trouble. So Thai Dai 1 goes rook b4, and he's actually tempting Gukesh to go for this sharp line with check here, king here, and then rook c5, and then black is still doing very well, but Gukesh instead goes for the safer move g6, just being very solid. a4 played by Thai Dai 1. He's just controlling his position there on the queen side, and now black can attack here with rook c3. Gukesh goes rook c d8. Two ideas. One is to attack the bishop, the other is to play rook d4, attack the b4 and a4 squares. Bishop c4 played. If you try to pin it here, then there is this fork which can get a bit nasty. So he first gives a check. Now king can go to h2 or h2 or g2. He goes king g2, and now if only this bishop could come in here, but there's a pawn that stops it, and Gukesh now thinks for a bit. He's a bit excited there. He sees rook d4. He pins the bishop here. The only way in which to get rid of this pin is knight e6 or knight e2. Thai Dai 1 goes knight e6, and now there's a very interesting move, bishop f7, because if you take, I take, and then there's a pin here. But there's also another brilliant move here. Let's see if Gukesh can find it. Yes, he does. a5. What a move. So if you take en passant, I have a check and it's a mate then. And if you take my rook, then I take, and there's no way to do en passant because you have lost the move, and then you lose a piece here. So brilliant awareness of the board by Gukesh for playing a5. One of the best moves aesthetically in this tournament till now. Of course, black was winning with other moves as well. But from the aesthetic perspective, it was very nice. Now the rook has to move. and Gukesh is going to simply snatch the snatch the bishop. And next, if b6 is played, there's check. So he first goes king f1, and here the game is already done and dusted, because whenever white plays b6, then I can simply go rook c8 and stop the pawn. Meanwhile, the king can start entering. That's what Gukesh does. And Thai Dai is simply a piece down. He resigns. Gukesh wins the game with a very interesting opening preparation idea, playing a middle game where he was not the most sort of decisive there by playing b5 a little too late, but he did play it well enough to get a very nice position, and then he converted it well. So, and a5 was the icing on the cake. Clearly a very strong game by Gukesh, and Thai Dai fought well, but in the end it was not enough. I like how both the players are analyzing with each other, which is very nice to see.